Today's guest is a filmmaker, storyteller, and man of faith whose work is helping people see the Bible through a completely different lens, literally. Craig DeHut is the co-founder of Appian Media, a non-profit production company bringing the stories of the Bible to life through stunning cinematic documentaries filmed on location in Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and beyond. But Craig isn't just a guy with a camera. He's an artist with a calling. His work combines faith, history, and visual storytelling in a way that's both reverent and radically creative. He's been behind the lens of the powerful series like Following the Messiah, Search for a King, and Trial and Triumph, helping audiences experience Scripture in a visceral, visual way. Today, we're digging into the moments that shaped his journey, his creative breakthroughs, spiritual pivots, and what it really takes to tell sacred stories in a modern world. This is a conversation about faith, filmmaking, and the kind of clarity that only comes when the mission finally clicks. Craig DeHut, welcome to The Moment It Clicked.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Craig, before we get into all the amazing stuff you've built, who were you before all this?
Who was I before? How far back do you want to go? So Appian Media started about a decade ago. Prior to that, I had graduated from film school back in 2007. And I really had ideas of being like a writer-director of feature films. I wanted to do narrative with, incorporating my faith and the worldview that I come from, but really scripting, acting, working with actors and things like that. And that has not been the path that I have been on since graduating. And I've been excited to see the various places that God has taken me and how that kind of led to what I've been doing now for about a decade. I've always been one that was interested in the creative arts, in writing, in photography and video, back when we were actually shooting on tapes, on camcorders and stuff, and pursuing technology. But it's been quite a journey, and it's been exciting to see how God has kind of led me in different ways, even beyond what I was anticipating.
Yeah, absolutely. So, growing up, what kind of kid were you? Do you think you're the quiet kid? Were you more of a class clown with a camera? Like, what's your personality like?
Sure. So I come from a large family. Growing up, there were 6 of us kids in a homeschool family. And I was certainly not the class clown, more reserved, more quiet, loved to read, loved to write. But I could and became comfortable with, performing in front of an audience, doing things like that. I once had aspirations to be a mime, and I'm thankful to say that particular career never took off. And so I was comfortable in that, but I certainly had other siblings that maybe more pursued the limelight more than I did, and I was perfectly fine with that. But yeah, I fell in love with filmmaking when I was 12 or 13 years old. Someone had gifted our family with a camcorder, and we would just go out, my siblings and I, into the backyard and grab as many friends as we could rope into that silliness, and made ridiculous things, detective stories, and we did car chases when none of us could drive a car, so shooting stationary vehicles in a way to make it look like they were moving.
Oh, yeah, I was about to ask. I was like, how do you get away with that?
You shoot it at night, and you use fans to simulate the wind, and you move the camera by over and over again, rather than relying on the car moving itself. Movie magic.
Yeah, I can see that.
But kind of, fell in love with that. But I had sworn to myself early on, that I wanted to go to film school, and I wanted to learn so that I could work for someone else, so that I could work on a crew and be underneath of someone and follow someone's creative direction. And, the last 10 years, I have found myself owning my own business and starting, co-founding a non-for-profit and managing a team and doing all the things that I was convinced I would never actually do. But God, I see all along, was kind of prepping me for that.
It's wonderful. And so what's something that might surprise people to know about your childhood?
Let's see. I loved to draw growing up, and through most of even my teenage years, where I was kind of falling in love with film and video, I really thought I was going to be a cartoonist, like an illustrator, drawing comic strips. And it's an industry that just not as many people appreciate anymore, because I grew up getting the newspaper delivered to our house and reading the comics section. And the Sunday comics were always the best because they were the ones in color, and all kinds of things that, generations today, I sound like an old man when I talk that way, but it's true. They just don't understand, how cool it was to get the Sunday morning papers. I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be the next Calvin and Hobbes, or the next Garfield.
Next Dilbert.
I live in Indiana. Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, is here. And that's what I wanted to be. And that lasted up until about the time I was 17 or 18 years old, and realized maybe I should diversify my creative interests. And it doesn't come up much nowadays, really hasn't in the last 20 years, but occasionally it is necessary for me to storyboard the videos that we produce. And I love me a good storyboard because it's basically a comic strip.
Yeah, because I used to do a little bit of comic strips, probably nothing on your level, but I had one about a little dog who got into adventures.
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about cartooning, filmmaking, it makes sense that you'd want to storyboard and draw it out. You have a clear picture of what you want and how the story's going to progress.
Yeah. And mine was never anything fancy. I mean, the characters that I developed were really just kind of advanced-looking stick figures. I didn't want to draw anything complicated, and that's essentially what my storyboards have become. That's all you really need for a good storyboard is some well-done stick figures, and so yeah, it's a talent that has never fully gone away. Maybe that's something I'll do in retirement when I hope that comic strips will make a comeback. But in the meantime, that's something that's not commonly known.
I feel like a few of them maybe pop off online. I've seen a few do pretty well if it's about the right subject or to the right audience.
Yeah.
But they're mostly humor. So I can see a lot of things if you even intertwined humor and faith. I could see that being a popular comic strip.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a place for it.
Yeah. So speaking of which, where did your faith and your artistry first start to intertwine?
That's a good question. So even before going to film school, I was writing short films. I was writing short stories. And I always felt pretty convicted that if I was going to entertain people, I should tell them stories that are worthwhile, stories that will make them better after viewing it. And some of them were very overtly Christian, overtly Christian themes and biblical ideas. And some of them were just good morals that, I wanted to enhance the viewer's view of the world. And in film school, that was a struggle because most of the students that I was around, and pretty much all of the professors that were teaching us, they were not interested in using film to promote those sorts of ideas. Quite the opposite. And it took me some time kind of to detox, frankly, from that education to use what I had learned and the skills that they taught me. They were very talented and very up on modern filmmaking techniques, but to kind of recommit myself to using the tools and the talents that God had given me to promote His truths and His morals and His word. And so I had a lot of different jobs out of film school. Worked in news, and I worked on the web and even mobile gaming. But there was always something in me that just wanted to be more overt and more meaningful and more intentional of the content that I was producing. And so when the idea was pitched by this other filmmaker friend of mine, Stuart Peck, a decade ago, he and I were both kind of talking about the need that we saw as far as some well-produced, biblically accurate docuseries that people could use. It just made perfect sense. It kind of was the thing I was looking for all along and just hadn't quite figured out how to pull that off. And so that's honestly where Appian Media began.
That's amazing. And so I watched Out of Egypt, and I was really surprised about not just the filming on location, which was wonderfully done. You got a lot of high-angle shots sort of going down, sort of like, I'm not sure if it wasn't quite fisheye, but it was just sort of like, was just an interesting angle that I've rarely seen. And then you've got the cartoons in between explaining different passages. I thought that was a really well done piece of cinematography.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, those angles you're probably referring to is we actually brought with us and have on many of our trips a 360-degree camera. And so it is extended on a boom pole or a selfie stick, honestly. And there's technology within that camera that it actually, I don't know how it does it. It's kind of magic, but it paints that pole out. So it appears like there's a camera floating above you all. And then in post-production, we can decide what angle of that we want to use. And so, yeah, we used that when we were walking through the city of Cairo. There are several different shots we used when we were out in the wilderness in Jordan. And then specifically your mention of those illustrations and the animations that we did, we want to make sure that we're constantly grounding what we're seeing in the land to the biblical account, the biblical story. And that's how we chose to, those are quotations from the Exodus story. And we wanted illustrations to depict those, and those are intermingled throughout the entire Out of Egypt.
Yeah. And so I didn't have time to go through the entire catalog because it's quite a bit. Were you ever thinking of making cartoons for children and just making it accessible to the new generation?
Sure. There has been some idea of that, and we have, over the years, incorporated more illustrations or animations in some of our series. There are some groups that I feel like do it very well, the Bible Project and others that not that they've cornered the market, but they're doing very well to communicate those things in an animated way. One of the hallmarks of what we produce is we really are trying to highlight the real places. We want to show you what those lands really look like. And so making use of illustrations and animations as needed, but on the whole, we're trying to carve out a path to help people understand these are real places, these were real people and real events, and to the best of our abilities, we want to show you what those look like, so that as you're reading the biblical account, you can go, okay, I can see it now. That's what Egypt looks like. That's what the Red Sea looks like. That's what Jerusalem looks like. And so, not to say that we never would. We do want our content to be accessible to all ages. And we have a series of videos. We call them Lessons from the Land. And so, for example, Out of Egypt is about the story of the Exodus, but we're also producing Lessons from the Land, the Exodus. And it's covering the same period of biblical history, but it's shot and written for more of a grade school level. Not that the content needs to be dumbed down necessarily, but the application and some of the questions are more geared towards that younger audience. We want people of all ages to get excited about reading the Bible again.
Beautiful. So take me back to when you first co-founded Appian. What did it feel like? Like, were you nervous? Was it was it like a full-on whisper, or was it a whisper, or was it like a full nudge? How did you feel?
Sure. I have met many people who have felt very convinced that, this was the Lord's leading, and I knew it. It was almost, I could hear a voice, I don't know that I could say it was that strong of a calling for us, but it seemed to make sense. The things that were tugging at our hearts and the things that we felt convicted of, and the opportunities that had kind of been placed in front of us, so that when this idea was first, thought of between the two of us, we had the skill set to at least try it. But I'll be the first to tell you, that very first project, we raised funds in the spring of 2016, and we were trying to raise $40,000, which, for those who know filmmaking, that is not enough to do a project like this, but it's all that we felt comfortable asking for. By God's goodness and the generosity of other people, we ended up raising about 65 in a month period to make that first trip to Israel. But the entire process, we were acting like this may be the only shot we get. This might be okay, people believed in this. I had never traveled over there, neither had Stuart. The farthest out of the country I had ever been was Montreal, Canada. And so we're going to give this a shot, and we have ideas of how this could be something that we, continue to do, but this may be it. And there was no guarantee that it would be received well. And in those first few years, Honestly, it wasn't like some breakout success. None of our content necessarily went viral all of a sudden. But every time we asked, and every time we did these fundraising efforts, and it took effort. There were times where, we're biting our nails, and, the 11th hour, we finally reached the thing that we need to greenlight the project. The support kept coming, and people kept watching and sharing and benefiting from the content. So that then allowed us to ask for larger budgets, to ask for more. It's taken 10 years. Honestly, it just recently occurred, but I have now been able to commit myself to this full time, and am thankful for that. But we never had that kind of explosive growth that many founders talk about. It has been slow and steady, and I think has required us to be patient. But there have been moments where we've really seen some great success and been thankful for that, and we'll keep at it for as long as He allows.
Mm-hmm. Well, that actually does remind me of a verse. It has something to do with the way wealth is built. It's wealth that stays is wealth built slowly, and it sounds like you guys have built a strong foundation.
That's always been our goal. We worried in those first few years, what if we release XYZ project and this thing blows up? I wasn't necessarily in a position to drop my freelancing career all of a sudden. Neither was Stuart, and we worried about what would happen. And I think in God's wisdom, He has allowed the growth to be steady, and sometimes slow, sometimes very fast, but always with enough that we can keep ahead of it and prayerfully consider next steps. And we've gone through hills and valleys, and there have been times where the money's been just about dried up, and we've had to put a pause on post-production of some things, and God then provided, and that's happened. There have been other events that have occurred. Stuart, after 9 years, chose this last fall to step away from Appian Media and pursue some other things. And so the team that is left, we're still continuing the work and bringing on additional help with that. And we're excited to see what God does. But anyone who wants you to believe that, something like this is just smooth sailing from day one, it is a grind. It is a struggle. It is a test of faith every time. And I think that's good and healthy for any founder.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, you mentioned fundraising. I'm curious, what does that actually look like? I'm assuming it's no different than, if someone's raising funds for an Avengers movie or something, or like, do you need to go to specific donors? How does the fundraising
work? Ours actually is quite different for our industry.
Okay.
Simply because we chose from the very beginning to adopt a very strange distribution model, which was to make this content and give it away for free. And people in our industry go, I'm sorry, what? You're doing what? How do you make your money? We have always wanted to produce content that removes as many barriers for the viewer. And so we did not want there to have to be a paywall between what we produced and anyone using it, as long as they had an internet connection that they could use it. And that required us to become a 501c3 in our first year. And so when people donate, when people give to the content, they're giving to a nonprofit organization. It's a tax-deductible donation. And that then allows us to raise the funds on the front end to cover all the costs. So that's administrative costs, but that's production, gear rental, paying our crew, post-production, the writing, the distribution of the workbooks that we produce. And all of that is taken into account. And over the years, like I said, the budgets have grown from $40,000 to take an international production trip to much higher amounts. But in the scope of what Hollywood typically spends on feature-length documentaries, we are still operating at a fraction of what they use. We consider ourselves stewards of the funds. It's not our money to spend. And so we're mindful of how to make every dollar stretch.
Hmm. And so was there ever a moment when you thought that this is bigger than us now, or was it from the very beginning?
I think that was how we talked about it from very early on, that we wanted to create something that was not dependent on any one person or even the two founders on the team, or the hosts. We've used a variety of hosts in our videos. Jeremy DeHut, you recognize him from out of Egypt. He shares the same last name as that because he's my oldest brother. Does an exceptional job. Barry Britnell is a guy that we used and have used from the beginning. He actually regularly leads tours over to the Bible lands. And we wanted to create something that didn't hinge on any one person, making use of the talent and the resources that we had at the time. But, Jeremy and Barry and these other people, they actually have full-time jobs doing other things. We contract them as we need. But if any of them were to say, as Stuart chose to say back in September, I would like to step away and pursue other things, we wanted this to still be able to function and to succeed, and to move on from that, because that's how any teacher of the gospel should feel. Our message should not hinge on us. I'm not preaching me. I'm not presenting me. Thank God for that. I'm presenting him if I'm doing it well, and that should survive and long after me, if I'm presenting the truth of the word. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And we have seen, honestly, since the release of that very first series following Messiah, that people then start using it in ways we never imagined. And we start seeing it being shared in countries that we didn't necessarily push it there, but it found its way there. I just got an email just the other day from a small home church in Australia asking for some content. And the answer is yes. Here, I'm going to do what I can to make that available to you. But I didn't go out searching for that. They found us. And we want this to continue to have a life beyond our own humble efforts.
Sure. And so what kind of ways did they use the content that surprised you?
Sure. Honestly, our original idea was because we were seeing specifically a lack of engagement in high school Bible classes. That was something that Stuart he was in the middle of teaching a Bible class with high school students, and he's like, I'm just not able to keep their attention. They're used to learning like this and with digital means in school, but then they come into Bible class and I don't have those tools available to them. And so that's what started it, was mostly that age group and mostly that setting. But it very quickly we realized, look, parents want this for their home. Preachers want this perhaps for their sermons. Schools want this for their classrooms. The homeschool community very quickly picked this thing up, even though we had not. I'm sorry to say I didn't think of the homeschool community when I first started producing this, but of course they would be interested in free resources about the Bible. And so that's been really encouraging. In fact, we've really kind of leaned into that. We regularly will go to one or two homeschool conventions each year with our content and our material, and kind of lean into that. And we've had people reach out to say, I work in a prison ministry, a women's prison in Florida, and they are very careful about what content we can bring in, but they let us bring in religious DVDs. And so we gifted them, some of our DVDs for some of our series, and they were able to do some Bible studies in a women's prison, which is super cool. That was not on our radar when we first provided this. But that's really been the goal, is we want to create the resource that anyone in any kind of environment could make use of and modify or adapt as they need in their own circumstance. And we've seen great response to that.
That's wonderful. And so was there a specific moment where everything clicked, where your purpose, passion, and faith came together? Or was it sort of a series of moments?
Probably a series of moments. There are, as any filmmaker can tell you, especially those who edit video, It's a common misconception of ours. We spend 2 weeks typically overseas to shoot the content, and then we come back, and a month later people are like, where's the video? Like, you don't understand post-production. It's going to be another 10 to 12 months. That there are periods during that long post-production period where I do the principal editing for us, and I think, what are we doing? I'm not sure if this is going to have the impact that I'm hoping for. Every creative I hear has that moment where, like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And it's usually right before they finish and go, actually, this is being received well. But what we produce is primarily viewed online. People can see it on YouTube and on other streaming channels. And I put it out there. We put it out there, and we hope that it's well received. But there have been occasions with every series where we can have in-person premieres or screenings, where I actually get to sit in a room with people, an audience, and see them respond to what we've put together. And those are the moments where it does click, where I go, okay, this was worth it. Every team member who invested in this has sacrificed, and there's blood, sweat, and tears, quite literally, for all of us. But to sit in a room and see people respond to that, to hear them come up and say, I see the Bible clearer now. To have young people come up, one of them came up to Stuart within the first couple of years, and he said, you guys made the Bible cool. And it's like, well, we didn't make it cool. It was cool all by itself. But I'm glad that we could do something that could change in a young person's mind how they viewed God's inspired word. It's cool to them in the same way that their favorite television show is cool, or their favorite music is cool. And so those are the moments, just hearing from people, how they're using it, how it's changing people, how it's getting people excited about the Bible again, that we kind of sit back and go, okay, that's worth it. We can put ourselves through this grind again. And we're kind of entering that phase. We're in the early stages of pre-production and development of what is going to be another 2 to 3 year process to create our next set of videos. And you have these kind of thoughts as you begin the process, like, are we ready for this again? And you just have to remind yourself, yeah, it is worth it. It is helping. And we believe that God is getting the glory for that.
Because I wish I had something like that when I was in high school. We were in religion class, and then they'd make us watch all these. I guess some of it was pretty interesting, but like I found yours to be cinematographically on a different level, and also the stories are just really well told. So you say you do the editing for those,
Correct.
So you must have like a very keen eye for what's going on in the story, and it definitely shows. Like the quality is very high.
Well, thank you. I am one of several people who shoot the video. Typically, I'm more of the second or third camera. We've got some very talented people who've served as directors of photography and our main shooters. And then typically story-wise, that's our hosts kind of writing those stories. They're delivering that content on camera. And then between Stuart and myself, we come back with hours and hours and hours of spoken content. And piecing that puzzle together is a collaborative effort. But it is fun. It is fun to take those pieces, decide which ones to use, which ones don't work, deciding when to go out and create more pieces to fill in those gaps, and then to make it hopefully all work together into one cohesive piece. That is satisfying, and I'm thrilled to be able to do it, and glad to have other people on board that help with many other aspects of the production.
Mm-hmm. And so after co-founding Appian, did any doors open that never would have before? Like what kind of opportunities have opened up for you?
Sure. I would say, it has allowed us to garner some attention that I had certainly never previously pursued. I have many of my family members, my father and several of my brothers, who actually preach the gospel on a regular basis. I do that on occasion, but certainly have not done that as a career. But to have invitations from churches around the country that say, would you be willing to come and teach a class for us or present some of your material? And I'm like, who are you talking to me? Or, sometimes Jeremy will be able to do that, or other members of the team. But there have been some times where, there was a church just west of Indianapolis, and it's like, okay, I'm 30 minutes from you. But yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Just opportunities to speak to people that I don't know would have paid attention to any of the work that I had previously done. That's one of the reasons why we typically will try to submit our content to Christian film festivals around the country, just because it gives us opportunity to talk with other industry professionals and hear from them and learn from them. And that's something that before Appian Media, I certainly did not have opportunity to do.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that. And so I'd like to pull back the curtain on the creative process a little bit. So what is your process like when you begin a new documentary or shoot?
Sure. Well, it starts with the word. I mean, everything that we're producing, we want it to be, solidly based in the biblical text. And so it's studying that through individually, together as a team, familiarizing ourselves with that portion of Scripture. And then it's very quickly talking with people who have been over to that part of the world already. So, for example, we're going to do a series on the life of Jesus. I had never been there, but Barry Britnell had, and Dan Kingsley, who's now one of our executive producers, had, and just asking them questions, getting some of their photographs. Maybe even nowadays it's being able to see some video that other people have shot and saying, okay, we want to tell this part of the story. Is there a location that we could visit where there's something there to see? Have they done archaeological work, or is there an expert over there that we could interview? And that's the process we're in right now. Our team is preparing to do a series on the Acts and the epistles, essentially kind of covering the rest of the New Testament story. This is going to involve multiple trips and many weeks of shooting. And so we're already, we're reading through Acts and we're reading through the epistles and we're looking at maps and looking at photos and asking people who've already been. And then it's crafting the schedule. As much as some of us might love to be over there for 4 weeks at a time and shoot everything we could possibly, we just can't do that. Financially, we can't do that. Many of us, are husbands and fathers, and we can't be away from our families like that. And so how do we decide what to shoot and what we need to pass on? How do we bring that schedule down to a reasonable length? Creating the budget for that. There's a lot of expense that many people don't think about. Plane tickets, accommodations, food, you're renting gear, you're paying for film permits. You can't just show up at these locations and shoot without permission. Not a good idea. You need permission ahead of time, and many of those locations cost a wide range of money. Some of them are incredibly expensive to shoot at. Getting permissions from local governments. Sometimes it's getting permission from local militaries. Not everywhere that we travel is particularly dangerous, but there are just things to be mindful of. You can't, as Americans, just drive wherever you want. Hiring a local fixer, hiring drivers and vehicles, and calculating all of that takes time. And then the fundraising is, we are a non-for-profit, so we have a board of directors. We've got, efforts that we put out, all of us, work to raise the funds throughout the year, but especially during large fundraising seasons as we're getting ready to enter into. And that takes time. There are a lot of things that I've learned along the way that I never thought I would need to know as a filmmaker that are necessary. And that's all of what I've just described to you is before we've ever set foot over in the Bible lands. And then it's getting over there and 10 to 14 hour shoot days. Usually we're shooting before sunrise and after sunset and taking naps where we can take them and charging batteries as we can and loving every minute of that. That's one of my favorite parts. And then it's coming back and making sense of it all, sifting through what we've captured, and working with our writers to make a cohesive story, and then committing that to those of us who edit it together and put it all together. And then we have some great writers who actually create these really great study guides. These are printed workbooks that have photos from over there. They have QR codes where you can scan and watch portions of each video that relate to that portion of the lesson. And then wash, rinse, repeat. Man, we go from the next to the next with prayer all along the way, and asking for wisdom and guidance, and bringing along, this begins at the beginning, but bringing along the right kind of creative people to help bring that vision to reality.
Wow. I can see why you would need a team, because that's already a lot, and you definitely need a lot of fundraising. When you mentioned that you needed permission from local militaries, I thought, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there is a common misconception, I think, about these Middle Eastern countries, where some people get the mistaken idea that every square inch of the Bible lands is in a constant conflict and war all the time, and it's really not that. I'm not certainly downplaying the conflict that does occur over there, but like, for example, I live in Indiana. It would be like saying there's a very dangerous city up in northern Indiana that I don't feel comfortable traveling to, therefore I won't travel to Indiana. Well, that doesn't necessarily make any sense. That's not fair to the rest of the state. Israel is a fairly small country. You can actually take Israel and put it inside of the state of Indiana and have plenty of room. It's not big. But there are areas where, yes, we may read in the news that there's a conflict happening, and again, I'm not downplaying it. I've got friends on both sides of what's happening there in Gaza, and it's real and it's devastating. But that doesn't mean that Jerusalem shut down, and it doesn't mean that tourists, aren't still visiting the country, because they are. Barry Britnell, our co-host, is actually over in Israel right now leading a tour. But it does mean that when you are over there, and this is true for any country in the world, you're respectful of local governments. You abide by the rules. You're a thoughtful traveler and mindful and respectful of the culture there. You need to be aware of their customs and their holidays and things that we may not know over here. But there are times, specifically when we traveled through Egypt, where we wanted to visit the traditional site of Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. And that's a tourist location. Tourists go there. But the road that we needed to take, we needed a military escort. They just needed to know that we had permission to travel from A to B. And so we had to provide that. There was no issue. There was no danger. But there potentially could have been if we just, as a bunch of Americans, loaded up in a vehicle and started driving through Sinai, And that's where our local fixers come in. These are people who know how to facilitate that kind of travel and give us all that heads up before we ever get there.
Yeah, okay, so that makes a lot of sense, and I can see how you would just want to make sure that you are safe in case something did happen. So how do you balance visual storytelling with biblical accuracy?
Good question. And I think this is a struggle of every Christian filmmaker. We have the written text, and our imaginations each do different things when we read the same religious text, right? And it's inspired by God. It's perfect. It doesn't need enhancing. But when you read a story based on the time in which you live, based on the culture in which you grow up, your brain may be creating different visuals than my brain, than their brain. And so how do you balance creating something that respects the material, that we never want to contradict what you read there? So if it says it happened a certain way, I have no creative license to change that. But sometimes the Bible doesn't provide a lot of details necessary to fill a scene. And again, we're not dealing with scripted actors. We're not hiring people to portray Jesus or others. So I don't need to worry about that my Jesus doesn't look the same as the Jesus you envisioned. But how do we communicate in in the shots that we choose, in the pacing of the scene, in the music perhaps that's selected, in the coloring of the image. How do we do that in a way that's respectful of the content, but as always been key to us, in a way that's professionally produced, that is could be sitting alongside of that top tier kind of historical Travel Channel type of stuff, and in a way that keeps people engaged. We're not trying to solely entertain you. And I don't want to just do a fun scene just for the sake of keeping the pace up, but combining those two things is a challenge with every scene, and it involves some intentionality. But that's something that, again, like I said, we wanted to remove roadblocks. So we removed the roadblock of paying for it. There should be no financial roadblock to enjoy our content. But you and I both know, it seems that if the content is not produced well, if the quality is so low that it itself becomes a roadblock, they're not going to listen, because that camera is so shaky, or that shot is so bad, or that presentation is just like, he's just not that great on camera. We want to remove all of that as best we can, and create something that's compelling to watch. But always does respect to the source material.
Yeah, so was there ever a moment when the vision you see in your head and the reality or the execution of the vision don't really match? Like, do you find a way to make it work?
We always find a way to make it work. As much as planning and pre-production as we do, we've got photos and sometimes videos of these locations before we get there, but we can't afford to location scout prior to shooting. So we show up and usually take a little bit of time to look around and go, okay, this is actually what it looks like. Or we show up and maybe there's hundreds of people around us, and we were planning to shoot the scene with just a few passerbys, but now we've got to figure out a way to make this scene work with crowds pressing around us. And this happens all the time in these particular countries. Numerous times throughout the day, there's the Muslim call to prayer, right? These loudspeakers that just, blast that prayer out wherever you are, and that's on purpose, but you obviously can't shoot a scene when that's happening. And so learning to adjust. Or, hey, we thought we were going to have 30 minutes here, and we've got 15. What can we shoot? Or, hey, and you'll see this when you watch Out of Egypt, we thought we were going to get up on Mount Sinai, at 2:00 in the afternoon, and instead we spent 4 hours down at the foot of it being extorted for more money until we could finally climb up to the top. And what do we do now that we have 45 minutes to shoot the scene when we thought we were going to have 4 hours? And that just means, it requires bringing on a team that's very flexible, that you do the planning, you have a plan A, B, C, D, and E, so that when you're there on site, you keep your cool, you keep your head, and you learn to be flexible. And oftentimes that has allowed us to produce things that were better than what we planned, giving us things that we did not expect to have, and for that I'm very grateful.
Wonderful. And I'd like to tie this back to faith. How has telling these stories changed your own faith?
So I became a Christian when I was in my teenage years. I had grown up in a home, obviously, that taught these things, and a family that believes these things. And so I believed the Bible prior to going on these trips. And I never felt the need, like, I have to see these places with my own eyes before I'll believe that it's true. Like, I never did feel that way. But going over there for the first time, it lit in me a fire that really remains unquenched here, where I just want to see it all. Now that I've seen some of it, boy, I want to see all of it. And the more I see of it, the more I am profoundly convinced that the message is true, that the events really did happen. There are details that could not have been accidentally made up. The amount of accuracy that we keep encountering, especially when you watch our series Searching for a King, which is about the first kings of Israel, specifically, Saul and David and Solomon. And there are historians that try to get you to believe that there's no evidence for David. David was probably just a legendary figure like a King Arthur or something. And the facts on the ground are very different. He really did exist, and there's proof of his existence. And to go there and see, like, not only do I have faith that the stories happen, but I have faith in the actual text itself, the copies that we have found over the centuries, where from 600 years apart, the copy they had back then, word for word, it's the same that they had 600 years later. They're faithfully copying it over generations. Has just been incredibly helpful for my own faith, but it also has allowed me to teach it better. I can teach it with more conviction and help people not just say, you need to believe God and believe the Bible because, but now we can say, because of this and evidence here and for this reason here. And it provides us with much more tangible proofs. Our faith does not require 100% accurate assurance of everything that we read, because then it wouldn't necessarily be faith. But boy, God has been so gracious to provide incredible evidence throughout history of key pieces of that story, so that I can use my faith not to take this giant leap of faith, but it's now become more of a very reasonable step of faith towards God, and that's been really helpful for me, and I know for the rest of our team.
Mm-hmm. And was there a spiritual lesson that you learned behind the camera that surprised you at all, or did it just reaffirm your faith?
Yeah, there are moments in every trip where we do kind of have to force ourselves to step out of production mode and set the cameras down and kind of look around and go like, let's take a moment and just appreciate where we're at right here. Trying to be intentional with our team to take time in prayer and actually talk with God and read his word while we're there, to let him talk with us. Because I know that God is using this in a way to benefit us, as well as our viewers, but it does take some intentionality and sometimes to slow down and think about it. To stand in the Garden of Gethsemane and think about Jesus' final night there and the anguish in which he prayed. The garden's still there. It's awesome. You can, from that vantage point, look over and see the walls of Jerusalem and see where that band of soldiers and Judas would have come out and with the torches and the clubs, and Jesus would have stood there and waited for them to come, and the spiritual implications of that, the profound implications of that. That happens to us multiple times every trip, where it's like, I've read this story 100 times, but now that's what it means. And I hope I never lose that reigniting of the flame that we experience every time we travel over there.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And so when the work gets hard, what keeps you grounded?
My wife, Karen. Remembering that what we have produced in the past has been helpful and beneficial. Because every project, multiple times throughout every project, there are moments where you sit back and you wonder, like, is this really worth it? I think people look at our social media profiles and they look at our YouTube channel and they think that, our team, we're just traveling international all the time and living our best life. And it's nothing could be farther from the truth. I do think I am living my best life, but it's a hard life sometimes. And it's fun, but it's also very hard and a challenge. Most of the time, I'm sitting in this office, editing the video by myself in a room. And it's during those times where, again, just reminding ourselves why we do what we do. It's not for us principally. We're in service to our donors who have provided the funds, but we're in service to everyone who's going to enjoy and use the content once it's finished. It's to the service of God and his kingdom. And when I read about the sacrifices and the work that the early Christians put forth in their work for the kingdom, I really cannot complain about anything that I'm doing now. And I wasn't kidding. You know, my wife Karen, all of us have spouses and friends and family that we can lean on and connect with and draw strength and encouragement from during the times where it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. And what would you tell someone who feels called to create something but doesn't feel equipped?
I would tell them to join the club. I don't think at any time I don't think any of us have felt, yes, I am perfectly equipped for this task, bring it on. But if you recognize that you have talents that could be used in the service of the kingdom, allow yourself to be teachable, to learn the other talents that maybe you still lack in order to accomplish that thing, and go and do the thing. And I think anyone who ever starts to feel like, yes, I am perfectly equipped to this task, and it's a good thing God asked me to do it because I'm the one, you need to take a step back and, eat some humble pie and reevaluate your position there. God has constantly called the inadequate, and he would make them adequate. I mean, the story of the Exodus is God calling Moses, and at the burning bush, Moses did not want to do it and gave God all the reasons why he was the wrong choice for the job. And he was poor of speech. And he was a fugitive on the run. He had killed someone in Egypt and had fled the country for 40 years. He was the least likely person. And God picked him so that when the work was accomplished, Moses couldn't brag about his own abilities. Moses really could only brag about what God did through him. And so if you're feeling inadequate, I think that's the exact right place to start. Be teachable, be moldable, learn new skills, especially in this creative industry. You either learn and keep learning, or you will fail in this industry. Keep learning and trying new things and pushing yourselves creatively, and let God use you.
Mm-hmm. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice I've ever received would simply be from those who, they encouraged me to get to know Jesus better and to learn what it meant that he sacrificed himself for me and what he calls me to do to respond to him. That has and will remain the best decision I've ever made. And that came through prompting from teachers and from my parents and others who said, listen, this is who he is, this is what he's done, and this is what you need to do to respond to that and accept his gift. And so I encourage that and try to give that piece of advice to everyone.
Wonderful. And so I like to end off on a lightning round. So no overthinking, just saying the first couple things that come to mind. One moment. I'm just getting over to the lightning round questions. Favorite piece of gear that you can't live without?
Favorite piece of gear that I can't live without would have to be my Sony FX3 right now. It's small, compact, and it's a camera that has a great image.
Most breathtaking place you've ever filmed?
Probably the top of Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. We got to spend the night up on the top of the mountain and wake up to the dawn. So, yeah, that's a core memory created there.
Which is more stressful, filming in a remote desert or organizing footage for post?
Filming in a remote desert, but I would take that over any other situation. I live for those moments.
If your life were a film genre, what would it be?
It would be a film noir, for sure. Black and white detective story.
Very cool. I like that. Favorite Bible verse?
Favorite Bible verse? Oh, that's hard. That's like asking your favorite child. The one coming top of mind right now, just John 14:15. Jesus says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." Just our love for Christ is demonstrated in what we are willing to do for him.
Most underrated Bible character?
Most underrated Bible character. Phineas. He's the dude who threw the spear, right? And ended the plague.
Huge.
Killed a couple people with a single spear and ended a plague.
One word you'd use to describe Jesus.
Everything. Is that cheating? He's everything. He's absolutely everything you will need.
I think it's accurate. Bible story you'd love to see as a high-budget movie.
I would say the divided kingdom of Israel. So Rehoboam, Jeroboam, the nation of Israel splits into Israel and Judah, and just the turmoil and chaos of those varying nations as Israel more quickly succumbs to the pressures of the nations around and becomes wicked and eventually is overthrown by Assyria. And then Judah, who struggles along, and still there's a remnant of faithful people and good kings, but it's just not quite enough to save them from Babylonian captivity. I think it's all one continued thread. Dude, that'd make an epic miniseries. So no one's ever really done it.
Well, you could be the one.
That's right. Or Dallas Jenkins, are you listening? Like, once you're done with The Chosen, do something Old Testament, perhaps.
Yeah. If you could time travel to any biblical moment, where are you going?
I think the creation of the world. I've got questions as far as what that looked like, and I would love to experience that.
What's something small that always makes you smile?
My kids giving me hugs. Yeah, I've got 3 kids here at home, and I come down from working up at the office, and they give me a hug like they haven't seen me in days. So, yeah, I love that.
If God sent you a text message right now, what would it say?
Get back to work. I don't know. I would hope that he would say, keep at it. But I feel like more than likely it would say, get back to work. I've got you, something encouraging to motivate me to keep pressing on.
And one word to describe the journey so far.
Insightful. I will not pretend that the journey has been easy. I am under no illusions that it will get easier. But with any journey, if we let him, God can teach us a lot about ourselves and about other people as we go through it. And
that wraps up the interview. Thank you, Craig.
You are so welcome. Man, I love those lightning questions. That's fun.
Perfect. And I'm just going to click stop on the recording, and then we'll just do some wrap-up.